Page, co-founder of No Labels, here with another edition of No Labels Talks with my friend, colleague, Ryan Clancy. How are you, Ryan?
Hey, Holly, what's going on?
Well, a lot is going on, Ryan.
Well, somebody did try to kill Donald Trump again.
Again, yes.
Um, you know, you were saying this before that this news came out that the guy was had camped out for 11 hours, and it was only an eagle-eyed Secret Service agent who saw the gun barrel from a distance that again prevented this from being something much worse. I will say this. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I do not think at all that there's anybody in the Secret Service who's doing anything but the best they can to protect Trump with the resources they have. But if I were a conspiracy theorist, the fact that this has now happened a second time, it's just, I don't know. This is not so good for the trust in government thing. Let's put it that way.
Very troubling, very troubling. And also just the tone and tenor of our politics. We can certainly understand from reports like this why, good, sane, common sense oriented people choose not to run or not to run for re-election. It takes a much bigger toll, I think, as you say, on our trust and on our overall institutions than one would think.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of our favorite members of Congress, Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin, who's just young guy, Marine, really thoughtful, led the special committee on China. He just left Congress this year. And the way he explained it is he said, look, I signed up for this, but my family didn't. And he described some of the things and he's got two young kids. I have a young kid, so I can relate to this. And he said, I didn't want to put them through that. And that is really sad because what it just means is more good people won't run. And that'll leave us with, whack jobs and people with access to grind and.
Absolutely. And we know from the insurance policy experiment that there were people for whom they took themselves out of consideration for exactly that reason. It wasn't necessarily they were worried about themselves, but the implications on their families. It was just great a price to ask them to pay. So, well, I just hope that we, the No Labels community, can help turn the page in this angry chapter of American political history and get back to respecting and honoring public servants and having public servants respect and honor the American people. That it goes both ways would be nice.
Politics is actually supposed to be boring.
Exactly.
It's not supposed to be a source of entertainment.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be nice.
Well, you moderated a really interesting conversation that folks tuning in right now will be able to listen to in a minute. And one thing that I wanted to call everyone's attention to is this idea of a turnout election. Of course, all elections are turnout elections. I've always thought that was a little bit of a misnomer. But the real question, as Dritan, our expert, one of our experts on the panel today, gets into, turnout who? And I think this is a really big issue for those of us in the common sense majority to grapple with, because both parties spend so much time and effort and energy trying to motivate non-voters or inconsistent voters to show up, that they neglect those of us in the middle who are consistent voters. And actually this is really at the core of what Al Fromm was thinking when he founded the DLC. I wasn't there actually, so I don't know. I didn't see it firsthand, but over the years we talked about it, his whole premise was, okay, of course we want everybody to vote who can vote, but how about the candidates talk to those who actually do show up and vote? And I would argue right now it is the common sense majority. We do get neglected. And I thought that was a really interesting aspect of today's conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Well, he thought that Trump was notably better at that, just than any other candidate. But that's a risky strategy to base a reelect on. This is I would see this over the years with people on the left. They would always say, look, you don't have to, you know, cater to the center. You just got to turn out your base. But of course, the base of young liberal voters who don't show up. And that was always like the brass ring you're always grabbing for, but can never
Right.
get. And anytime you hear somebody say, a candidate, I'm going to win an election on the strength of people who have never voted before, you should question probably the effectiveness of that strategy.
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons why his comment about the special powers of President Trump being able to actually turn out non-voters really, hit me, because the left of the Democratic Party has for years and years and years. This is their central premise. If you essentially give enough things, if the government promises enough, that non-voters will vote, and it turns out actually it is the other side that can be more motivated to show up, really through anger more than anything else. But the other thing I think that those of us, I thought it was stunning, and folks who listen will also hear this, 18% of voters have still not made up their minds, and that no one watching is probably going to be swayed by more reasons not to vote for President Trump. So I think it really is incumbent on Vice President Harris to start to put some real ideas behind the rhetoric that she is currently campaigning on, that is very America wants to turn a page, stop dividing us. Okay, we wrote those lyrics, so we know that song. But as you and I know better than most, that position, the position of no labels, comes with a lot of, you make a lot of people angry, right?
Yep.
And so the question is, what is she willing to do that will anger her own party to help show the American people that she's really serious about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's if you looked at the kind of analysis after the debate, I mean, most people agree Trump lost. He did not do a good job, but there certainly was not a consensus. And look, she got in some nice jabs and everything, but to the extent she had a vulnerability, which was people don't still quite know exactly what the vision is and what would you really do if you got in there behind the desk. I don't think that's answered yet in the minds of most voters, which explains why, 18% of people still undecided. What's interesting is, if you talk to anybody who's a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat or Republican, that's like an inconceivable number to them, which right. They just can't wrap their head around. How could anybody be undecided?
Right.
Because it is, this is not, well, I could have Bob Dole or Bill Clinton, and you can talk yourself into they're not that different. This is about as different as it gets.
Mm-hmm.
And still you got 18% of people saying, I don't know.
True. And it could well be, as we were talking about again, well over a year ago, that maybe they decide not to vote for either, right? That they don't vote the presidential line, or they don't vote at all, or whatever. But those are certainly possibilities that could have a tremendous impact on the future of the election. Yes,
that can happen. Well, look, let's get to this with Chris McNulty, our data guru, and Dritan Nesho from Harris X, the polling firm, and a new voice, Jeff Forbes, a really talented political veteran who we're having on for the first time. We get into all these things. We get into whether vice presidential debates matter, hint, they don't, but we'll watch anyway, and a lot of other things. So everybody enjoyed this week's edition of No Labels Talks. Hi, everybody. This is Ryan Clancy, Chief Strategist for No Labels, here with another edition of No Labels Talks. And we've got a lot to talk about. This is our political roundtable, which we've tried to host over the course of the last couple months after key events like debates. We've got some familiar faces and a new one. Chris McNulty from Causeway Solutions. Chris is a data and modeling guru. We're going to have Dritan Nesho from Harris X, one of the most accurate pollsters in the country, and a new face, Jeff Forbes from Forbes Tate's Partners. Jeff, why don't we start there and just maybe you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, because I think some of the people who listen to this know Dritan and Chris, but what's your story?
Yeah, I'm Jeff Forbes. I graduated from Denison in 1987 and went on to New Hampshire to work for Al Gore's forgettable 1988 presidential campaign, where I met Nancy. And then went on 4 years later, I worked for Bill Clinton up in New Hampshire and then all over the country. So I was one of the Clinton people. I then went to the DNC and then his reelect. And then I went into Max Baucus's office and became his chief of staff to get him through his 2002 campaign. After which I started a lobby shop and where we lobby, but we also do a lot of political work here.
So Jeff, let me start with this. So much has already happened in just the last several days. We of course had the debate last week and another attempt, unfortunately, on President Trump, former President Trump, this weekend. Jeff, what have you seen in the polling you've looked at and other information you've looked at about the impact of the debate and the extent to which that's going to shape the race going forward?
I mean, I think that obviously she was really good in the debate and he was really bad. And right now the numbers are pretty much where they were before. And even if they're up a little bit, they'll come back. I mean, we're such a polarized nation, it doesn't matter. Like the debate that Joe Biden went through was a completely different thing. And even those numbers didn't shift as much as one would think they should have. But we're at this point now where people kind of know where they are. And this doesn't bode well for the Senate seats for a lot of Dems as well, based on how people vote.
Yeah.
We're at a point where we're so polarized and so in our corners and not willing to work with anyone that stuff like this, a big debate that normally should have been a 10-point swing and a 10-point bump, doesn't matter. Two conventions, both very good for each party, depending on your perspective, no bump. Like it is, we're just at a point where it really takes something dramatic. I don't know that there was that big a bump from an assassination attempt for that matter. So, and who knows what the most recent one matters. It feels as though people are so callous. I don't know if they'll notice it, but we'll see. So I think that she was great in the debate. She didn't blow up. She got her points across. She did really well. He was not great in the debate, and the race is pretty much still at 2.7 nationally. And if anything, and I'm doing this based on the public polling I've looked at, it's actually the battleground seems to have tightened since the debate. And I don't think that's about the debate. I think that's just about the natural tightening we're seeing in mid-September.
Chris, did you and your team, did you all put anything in the field over this weekend or the aftermath of the debate? And if so,
yeah.
what would you find?
Yeah, we've had to because of crazy events, we've had to go back and remodel a number of times our national model, the last of which was post debate. I agree with I'll tell you what I find in it is first part is I agree with Jeff. See no movement, really very, very little movement certainly because of the debate. I don't think that has occurred. I do think what has happened, what is still happening, I should say, I think there was a missed opportunity by Trump. We've talked about it before here. Harris certainly did very well. She clearly beat Trump in that debate. All of the post polls on it show that. But like Jeff said, it didn't move the electorate. There is still a vulnerability in the Trump electorate, though, and that is these kind of soft Trump supporters. As we talked about all last year, we saw anywhere from 10-15% of hard Republicans who frankly are not Trump fans to a greater or lesser degree. I think the debate was an opportunity for Trump to bring some of those folks back in the fold. They're not going to vote for Harris. The question is, do they vote at the top of the ticket? And every vote is going to matter from a turnout perspective in those battleground states. I think the untold story of the debate was that Trump really missed an opportunity to bring those folks back in.
Dritan, who we have with us now, I want to ask you in particular about the swing states, and let's talk about Pennsylvania in particular. Where do things stand right now in Pennsylvania? Which, and I'm sure for those who are following, everybody knows this, but it really is the key state. It is hard to imagine either candidate winning. I mean, there's a couple kind of bank shot strategies where maybe they could, but whoever wins Pennsylvania will probably win the White House. What's going on there, especially post-debate?
Well, I will say that the race is still very tight, as Jeff mentioned. So we did a post-debate poll as well. And prior to the debate, Harris was up by 2 points, which is, within that margin which polls move. And after the debate, she's up 3 points, despite the polls overwhelmingly suggesting, including our poll, that she demonstrated better leadership qualities than Trump did during the debate and actually won the debate. And so, and state polls are even tighter than national polls, or have been tighter than national polls. The question that you ask really plays into swing voters, right? 18% of voters are yet to make up their mind. And that translates pretty nicely and on an equivalent basis to the key swing states, states like Pennsylvania. And these voters are issues voters. These voters are actually our common sense majority voters. These are voters that are not swayed by the rhetoric. They're voters who wanted the debate to focus a lot more on core issues like the economy, like education, a broader discussion of healthcare that isn't just about abortion, but it's about the costs of healthcare and beyond. And every single one of the parties, as Chris just mentioned, about 10 to 15% of Republicans could still change their mind and cross the aisle and vote the other way. But the number is exactly the same for Democrats as well. It's about 10 to 15%, depending on the poll that you look at. And overwhelmingly, these swing voters in the middle, this 20% of the electorate that hasn't made up their mind, they're independent voters. They tend to skew multicultural, predominantly Hispanic, African American, a little bit less than that, Asian American, a little bit less as well. They tend to skew younger. They are voters that are 45 years old or younger. They tend to be equally urban and rural. And they tend to skew a little bit more female. Now, the female vote is roughly split. Kamala Harris is only about 2 points ahead of Trump. So each of the candidates and each of their campaigns have many different paths to victory here. But every single one of those paths to victory run through the middle. They run through issues-based voters that want to go beyond the rhetoric and really focus on a vision for the future and actual solutions for the country.
That's what I'd like to ask Jeff about, which is, we had Chuck Todd on a couple months ago, and this is when President Biden was still in the race. And he was talking about how he thought there was an internal tension within the Biden campaign between younger strategists who thought this was just a base mobilization election, just like let's keep our base happy, and that explains a lot of things they did on student loans and climate and everything else. And then there were some older strategists who thought, hey, this is we got to grab the middle. That's the way we win. And in Chuck's view at the time, it was the younger base mobilization strategists that were winning the argument. Do you think that has flipped now? If you look at the Harris campaign, do you think she really is meaningfully moving towards the center?
Well, I certainly have enjoyed watching this campaign and feel like I'm relating to her for the first time ever. So that makes me say yes. But I don't know if it's that, or I'm just so, I'm so fearful of Trump that I'm grasping onto anything. It could go either way. But I think that she is. I think that she's sort of having it both ways. I think she does enough to keep the base happy while going and talking about moving a little bit more to the center of where Biden is. I mean, I thought that it was very, Biden went. We had a really great bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the Biden operation sort of let the progressive caucus in the House hijack it. I thought that was a terrible mistake and terrible to have happen. It certainly feels as though, as a candidate, that wouldn't be sort of where this operation would go today. Now, how they govern is a different story. We don't know. Who knows what happens? Who knows the role Nancy Pelosi played? There are a number of different factors that exist there. But the need to placate the left doesn't seem to be their absolute number one priority, while there's still certainly way more to the left than way more left of me as a Democrat also. Now, I'm also not your traditional Democrat, so I don't know that my vote counts that much, but I do think that they're doing a very good job of kind of having it both ways, if you want to know the truth.
Chris, you described the debate, previous one, as a missed opportunity for Trump to define Harris in unfavorable terms, and as too left for the country. Given the fact we might not have another debate, what is his opening to press that case again, or did he miss it?
I think the biggest opportunity was missed. You can go and through your speeches and through ads and such, you can try to drive that home, but nothing was as visible or would have been as good a kickoff for that messaging as a debate opportunity was. I think that's one of the reasons why it was a missed opportunity in that regard. And I would argue a missed opportunity for both swing voters and those soft. I'm defining differently here. A traditional swing voter, I don't know who I'm going to vote for. I vote for either party, either way. When I say swing vote, there's a missed opportunity with those folks. But I think for those folks, it's about leadership that like Dritan mentioned, because frankly, if they're not committed so hard on any one issue, or otherwise they would be in a party. They'd have more party affiliation. It's about leadership, in my opinion, for that middle swing voter. The voter that I'm talking about that was truly a missed opportunity here was that, again, the Republican voters, traditional Republican voters, who are very hesitant to vote for Trump. Again, some 10-15% of hard Republicans out there that are fit that bill. Again, do most of them come back? Probably. But in a close state in Pennsylvania, if 1%, 2% of hard Republicans skip the top of the race, don't vote there because they can't do it, they're not going to vote for Harris, you could lose the whole race over that. And that when I say missed opportunity, I'm talking particularly about those hard Republicans. But certainly, and one of the avenues you would have done that with is defining Harris as a liberal, out of touch liberal. And again, I think that was missed in the debate.
The conventional wisdom is that there's really only 7 states that matter in this election. Georgia, the upper Midwest states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, North Carolina. I'm missing one. But Dritan, are there, when you look at the polling data in other states, are there any states outside of those 7 that you think have the potential to be meaningful and to get into play before we get to election day?
Yeah, I would say that the Sun Belt, the so-called Sun Belt, Arizona, Nevada, even big middle states like Texas and Florida, and also Georgia, are as important in this election as the Rust Belt states. It's a very close election. The dynamic is one where it's really Trump v. Trump and Harris v. Harris, right? None of the candidates can really win against the other, but they can rise and kind of push the resistance levels to win. And it was a missed opportunity for Trump. I fully agree with Chris on that analysis. He took the bait on several questions that really made him lose the election, but it also was a bit of a missed opportunity for Kamala as well, because the expectations were that she was going to very clearly define her vision for the future and how she would get to that better state, to that future better state. And she didn't quite do that, right? There was no meat on potatoes in that debate. There was no beef there. And this might explain the resistance level that she's hit. That despite the fact that she performed better than Trump by 16 points, she only gained 1% on the horse race. That is a disproportionate result between how people are judging the debate and whether or not the debate is swaying people to actually vote one way or another. So this is really how I'm looking at the election right now. And it's whoever builds themselves up the best, makes the least number of errors, and really starts fleshing out their vision for the future is going to be the one that actually pulls through on November.
I think
go
one
ahead.
thing to add on to the back of that is like, I think that the unknown in Florida, which I think at the end of the day, it's hard to see Florida and Texas voting Democrat. But the one unknown in Florida is going to be the abortion on the ballot and what effect that has. There's sort of been a silent vote around that a lot of polling has missed on abortion since 2022. So how that affects it will be interesting. And does it affect it? Maybe that was a 2022 thing and it's not going to be there the way it was now. Who knows? But I think that is that's going to be something that will be like interesting to see. The other thing I'd say is I totally agree that people wanted to see Harris like put a vision out there, but in a debate where the guy's going to like absolutely rip apart everything that you're saying, it's a hard form to do it. So I think that and I'm not being an apologist for anyone. I'm just saying I think that while people wanted to see it, I think that was a unrealistic expectation to see it in the debate.
I want to ask, and maybe Chris, you have a thought about this. So we may not have another presidential debate. We are going to have a vice presidential debate between Senator J.D. Vance, Governor Tim Walz. Now, historically, these debates don't matter all that much. Every so often, maybe the Sarah Palin debate kind of mattered, but a lot of them kind of get lost to history unless they're really notably bad for some reason. Do you suspect this debate can move anything materially one way or the other?
In a word, no. For all the historic reasons, I expect we'll hear a lot about cats, dogs, and lack of military service.
Yeah, right. Dritan, what do you think about the VP debate?
I agree. I mean, debates, look, the last debate between Trump and Biden was the exception that swallows the rule. And what I mean by that is that debates usually don't really matter that much unless they really, really matter, like the one that we just went through. So vice presidential debate, unlikely to move the dial in any direction.
Yeah. I want to ask before we open up to audience questions, obviously so much focus on the presidential race for obvious reasons, but we're going to have Senate and House races. And in particular, the Senate is going to be really close. Just to set everybody, where we are kind of now is Democrats have a 1-seat majority. There are 34 seats up, as there always is every 2 years, because the Senate is on 6-year cycles. Republicans are almost certainly going to take Joe Manchin's seat. He's retiring, and that's a very structurally Republican state. So that now brings the Senate to 50-50. The other big states that are currently held by Democrats, where it looks like Republicans could take the seats, are Montana, where you have incumbent Democratic Senator John Tester running against Republican challenger Tim Sheehy, and then Ohio, where the Democratic incumbent is Sherrod Brown and the Republican is Bernie Moreno. Dritan, I want to start with you and then go to Chris. What are you seeing in those races right now?
Look, I think that in an election dynamic like the one that we are seeing, voters are increasingly likely to split the ballot. And if it's a Harris victory, then voters will compensate by actually leaning towards Republicans and split government in this case. And if Trump somehow manages to eke it through, then I actually expect the Democrats to perform a little bit better than the polling indicates and otherwise would. Right now, when we look at the ballot test, are you planning to vote for your Republican candidate to Congress, Democratic candidate to Congress, or not doing so, not voting at all? What you see is Republicans either having a slight edge or a tie. And really, that question, Democrats usually in polling need to be ahead by 3-4 percentage points or more to actually be able to tip the scales downrange in these types of elections. So while I don't have access to specific state polling for the states that you mentioned, my guess is that given the dynamic that's at play, voters will split the ticket, and that'll determine which way down ballot races go.
Chris, I was on a separate call last week with somebody on the Republican side who's very closely following these Senate races. And he thought the Montana Senate race had moved from a toss-up to lean Republican. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very possible that if I was calling it today, I'd say Republicans pick up 2 seats and take the majority in the Senate. And in those 2 seats you've already identified, West Virginia and Montana. I think Montana is absolutely moving into a more likely, or not solid, but more likely Republican pickup opportunity. I do not see Ohio, that's my home state, so that's a little harder to say, that same way. I think Ohio depends on Trump's margin in the state. J.D. Vance is a good example. J.D. Vance won his race when, in that case, Governor DeWine was winning the gubernatorial race. Republican governor was winning by 25 points, and really got pulled across. Bernie Moreno needs the same thing. He needs about a 10-point, maybe 8-point win by Trump at worst in Ohio in order, I think, to get across the line. And I don't necessarily see that right now. I think the other one to watch is Nevada. I think there's a lot of volatility in the Nevada electorate. As Dritan said earlier, those Sunbelt states is out there. That could be a sleeper for Republicans. I would say today, if Republicans picked up a 3rd seat, it would be the Nevada seat.
And right now, all red is allegedly within the margin, but I think that's it's just hard to see us ultimately winning Texas. The one sort of little bit of reality I want to put on all this, though, is that in 1984, 17 states voted one way for president and the other way for Senate. In 2016, 0, and in 2021 did, and that was Maine, which one of the seats went to Trump, one of the CDs. So I think that while I agree that on the down ballot races from congressional down, I do think that you're going to see ticket splitters. I don't think you'll see them in the. It's hard to see a lot of ticket splitters in the Senate races. It's just the way the trajectory's been going.
Interesting. One last question for all of you before we open up to the audience questions. We were talking last week to Joe Sternberg, who's a columnist for the Wall Street Journal, and he was talking about October surprises, which he first started talking about this a year ago. And there were 3 things in particular that he suggested could kind of come out of nowhere and really shape the election. One was a recession in China. 2 was more political fallout in Europe. And then 3 was some kind of recession here, maybe tied to the commercial real estate market, because there's a lot of banks that have exposure to these loans that suddenly don't look so good with the interest rate environment. Is there anything else you all are looking at in terms of things that could come a little bit out of nowhere and suddenly matter quite a bit in October?
On one hand, I would say because of early vote, October surprise doesn't have the effect that it used to have. On the other hand, I'd say all these battleground states are going to be decided by probably under 50,000 votes, so it will have effect. So yeah. I don't know what it could be. I mean, obviously, it was the bank crisis did in McCain. Although I think my guess is that Obama would have won anyway, yeah. But it certainly didn't. It certainly sealed it earlier. So some kind of a recessionary like event could certainly do it. Some sort of, you know, there could be, who knows what ends up happening, like some big terrorist attack could happen, that could do it. I mean, there are a number of different things. I don't see any sort of scandalous type of October surprise that's out there. I mean, that would be, I would think that people would have done it now that ballots are printed and you can't switch your nominee.
Yeah. Chris, Dritan, anything on your end that you're looking at?
Chris?
The only thing I would say is, I think Harris has done a decent job separating herself from the Biden administration's kind of forever war mantra that Republicans have pushed. She's done a decent job separating herself from that. Somehow she's threaded the needle. I think it would take an international event that really reminded folks that things are chaotic in the international stage, and America is not where it needs to be to prevent them from happening or handle the situation. I think that's being overly general, but we're talking about hypotheticals anyway. But I think that is what's missing.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would say that the potential for October surprises is very, very high. And the economy is one area, immigration is another area, especially if it's linked to some kind of terror incident, the domestic terror incident, or crime, a surge in crime, and then certainly the international arena as well. I would say that while Harris might have threaded the needle, and I don't necessarily personally agree with that, but on foreign policy, she holds the bag on the issue positions of the Biden administration through and through. The reason why 70% plus of voters say that they know enough about Harris, even though she hasn't stipulated her own positions on most issues yet in a very clear way and in a very consistent way, it's because they view her as continuity with the Biden administration. So anything that reminds voters of something that they dislike about the Biden administration's track record on the economy, on immigration, on crime, or on foreign policy will likely hurt her. And so that's something to keep an eye out for. And I agree with Jeff that the difference in many of these states will be quite tight, tighter still than in 2016 and in 2020, perhaps. And any such event can make a big difference.
Interesting. Want to go to questions. Just a reminder for everybody, just if you want to ask a question, you can just raise your hand and make sure you have your camera on. The other thing, because we have so many people that do want to ask questions, if you can try to keep your questions to 30 seconds or less, that would help increase the odds that everybody will get to answer their question. So appreciate that. Let's start with David, and if you could just say where you're from. David. David, I think you are on mute. I think David is still on mute. Let's go to Elena, and maybe we can come back to David.
Wait, I'm off mute.
There we go. Okay, David, what's your question?
I'm sorry. Hi, Chris and others. I know Chris pretty well. I have one question. Can you please compare your view? I think turnout is the whole thing. So my question is, obviously turnout has improved dramatically with a new Democratic candidate. How would you compare your projection of turnout in 2024 versus 2020, 2018, and most importantly, 2008?
Well, I think, to be fair, you got to take the midterms off. So 2018, for example, 2022. You could talk about percentages, but obviously there will be more people that vote here in the presidential election. I think this election, it was going to be, in my opinion, extremely low turnout, but by comparison to 2020 or 2016, even before Biden got out. When Biden got out, Harris got in. I think that increased turnout a little bit, and we saw this in the modeling. Hard Democrats that were kind of mid and low propensity, less likely to go out, but good hard Democrats were completely uninterested in Joe Biden and they were not going to go vote. There was going to be no motivation for them. Now there is. One of the reasons you've seen Harris come up in the polls, it's less about convincing people in the middle and more about getting, in my opinion, and more about getting people that were already kind of Democrats more engaged in the process. That has happened. We've seen that happen. I still think it'll be lower turnout than 16 and in 20. But it's not going to be completely abysmal as it was would have been had Biden stayed in the race.
Thank you, gentlemen, and ladies, for comments in this interesting discussion. I'm Barry Miller from Florida. It appears that regardless of what was said pre or post convention by former President Trump, he appears to be focused solely on his base. He's not really discussing issues to bring in undecided voters. I've seen this written and discussed in different media outlets. Is it possible that that's a winning strategy? And if it is so apparent to so many people, what is the Harris campaign doing to find the voters, get over that base number of voters that Trump has? Thank you.
Chris, maybe you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I'll go real quick. I think it is possible to answer your question. Is it a winning strategy? And I say that because I still believe, and we've seen for years now, that the more likely the voter, Republican all the way across, hard Republican all the way across the spectrum to hard Democrat, Biden has a slight edge on the more likely voters to turn out. Harris. The lower you go on the turnout scale, particularly on the right, particularly on the Trump side, the greater the support gets for those voters. I believe, and it's opposite what kind of history has told us, that a low turnout election benefits Harris. A high turnout election benefits Trump, in my opinion, because there's a whole heck of a lot of voters just right of center that frankly fit into the kind of demographic, being overly broad here. J.D. Vance, recent J.D. Vance, I believe, was selected as VP, or one of the reasons, into that bucket of voters that lean Republican, lean Trump, but are not sold yet. And I think they respond to that messaging. And I think that's why you hear that message. It's less for the locked in MAGA voter and more for the person that feels left behind, that just might sit it out because he doesn't believe in either party. He or she doesn't believe in either party. I think that is the turnout mechanism. And that's what Trump, I believe, if there is a method to the madness, is speaking to. So yes, I think there is a possibility if those folks come out in mass.
And I think to go with that, there's a big concern in the polling world that there's that sort of since the, well, even before the debate, but definitely since the debate, there's been a reduction in respondents that are of the more pro-MAGA world than there are of not. And I think that could skew some polling and could skew some of this stuff. And that feeds right into Chris's point, which is these folks that are sitting there and they're quiet. It's just like the quiet abortion vote of 22. Is this, and you kind of saw it in 2016, you saw it with Brexit, and then you saw it with him. Now that he was more of an unknown then, so it's a little bit different. But I do think, and as Dritan also has said, like there's no doubt that like people are now okay saying that they're for Trump, whereas they weren't in 2016. But I think that the lack of response and the sort of like the sort of insular nature of a lot of these MAGA voters, you could see it's something pretty significant come of it. And I think that Trump played to his base in 16, he played to his base in 20, overperformed frankly in 20, and he's playing to his base again. I think that's just the way that they've seen this play out.
Yeah, I would add to that Trump's secret power is really bringing in voters that don't usually vote into the voting pool, the so-called couch potato voters, which is actually a pool of voters that's anywhere between 30 to 40 million voters, and they skew very heavily being economically vulnerable, being white, and being rural and suburban. And so when Trump goes out and he says, oh, I grew the ranks of the Republican Party, well, yes, he's absolutely right. He's not a conventional Republican. He's a populist that pulls from this pool of disaffected voters. And that's very, very difficult to assess, because these are not the kind of voters that say, I'm 18 plus and registered to vote, or the kind of voters that say, I'm very likely to show up and vote on election day. So as Chris said, I fully agree. It's possible that he can win by basically doubling down on his base, but I don't think that his own consultants and the Republican Party themselves can assess the effect of what that means and how many of these voters Trump can pull on election day to be able to claim victory. And so it's a little bit flying the plane without a sense of how far off the ground you are and how you're coming in, which again, Trump could do and has done before, and has done before successfully too, is just not how most navigate campaigns and elections.
One more fun fact about that audience that we're talking about here, Dritan nailed it. The only other thing that I would add is they also get their information from dramatically different sources than your average high turnout likely swing voter. They're cord cutters. They don't get cable TV. They don't watch live TV. They're getting primarily their information from streaming services and newer age social media services. It's an extremely hard or different group to reach. They're not watching traditional campaign ads on ABC News at night. It's just not happening. They're not seeing those things. They don't have cable. They don't watch live TV. They get a lot of information from podcasts. That's why Joe Rogan and such is kind of key. That's why on the last night of the last night of the Republican convention, you had Dana White from UFC and the like. That kind of lineup was kind of specifically designed, in my opinion. I didn't have anything to do with it, but specifically designed to kind of get in the DMs, if you will, of these voters.
And as for what's the Harris campaign doing to offset it, I'm not involved in the Harris campaign, so I don't really know. But I do know that they too have had a significant increase in their non-traditional advertising budget. So I believe I would have to deduce that that's to go after the Democrat version of this person that's trying to decide whether to vote or not.
And I think Tim Walz was a selection in that regard as well.
Totally.
The football coach, from mainstream America, if you paint him in that light, is a heck of a lot more in line than a prosecutor from San Francisco.
Yeah. Thank you all, giving us a lot to think about. Chris McNulty from Causeway Solutions, Jeff Forbes from Forbes Tate, Dritan, Nesho from Harris X. You guys always have great insights, and we'll look forward to having you back on the other end. And maybe we'll talk about the vice presidential debate, even though we all agreed it doesn't really matter. But for those of you listening,
would be vice president, right?
That's right. For those of you listening, a reminder, you've probably heard us previously talk about this big conference we're hosting about a month after the election, the No Labels National Meeting. It'll be on December 12th in DC. We think it'll be a really pivotal moment a month after this really contentious election to get some leaders together, House, Senate, and others who are really willing to stand up and be counted and say, hey, the election is over. It's time to put our focus on working together to solve the problems that really matter as we go into 2025. So if you are interested in attending, Marianne, my colleague here, she's Marianne, MARYANNE at nolabels.org. You can just send her a note and she can tell you how to sign up. In the meantime, I look forward to seeing you all next week on the next No Labels Talks. Everybody have a great week.